Anarchy. What does it say?
Says Dan.
Says Dan. Oh, we're live. So Patrick MacFarlane here with the Liberty Weekly podcast, here with the Libertarian Union, and we're doing the State of the Libertarian Union talk show for June 24th. And I'm joined by three hosts who also have shows in the Libertarian Union. That is Mike Tilden, Dan, Elwood of Actual Anarchy, and Kyle Anzalone of Foreign Policy Focus. So I'll hand it off first to Mike with Battle for Liberty. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm great. I'm back on the road. Took a break for about a month and a half with my travel schedule, but back in this beautiful scenery here in Tampa, Florida, getting ready to talk with you fine gentlemen.
Paula, how about you, Dan?
Sorry, I had to unmute there. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
All right. So, yeah, I'm Daniel Elwood of the Actual Anarchy podcast, and also the Last Nighters podcast, which is a normie-friendly version that we do to get the anarchy stank out of the equation so that we have a little bit more appeal for people. However, we also run actualanarchy.com, which endeavors to take the term back and correct the definition, right? Because a lot of these things slip and slide around. But anarchy really just means voluntary exchange, and so we aim to take it back from leftists who like to smash Starbucks windows. Our shtick is to analyze movies or films and TV shows from a Rothbardian anarcho-capitalist perspective, and the idea is to slip it in or slide in some ideas that are free market economics or morality from the non-aggression principle perspective, and give people who are familiar with the movie a way to grasp onto some of the concepts so they're less nebulous and perhaps could be a gateway drug to get them into the rabbit hole of Ron Paul and Mises Institute, Rothbard, Hoppe, and the rest. So that's our stuff. Check it out at actualanarchy.com. We also do Blacken.Gold, which is a internet marketing type, like learning how to make money online. I also run Conquest of Bread, which is a master troll of the Kropotkin book. So anyone who ends up talking to a leftist anarchist who says, oh, you just need to read Kropotkin, man, they're going to go and search in the Googles, and they're going to find me with articles about how anarcho-communism is bullshit. So that's my master troll, and back to you there, Pat.
Yeah, so we'll hand it off next to Kyle Anzalone of Foreign Policy Focus. How's it going, man?
Hey, thanks, Pat, and glad to be on with all of you. I think this is the first time I've ever been on with this group, so excited to talk, especially to Mike. But Foreign Policy Focus is a podcast, and surprise, I talk about foreign policy 3 days a week: Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I've had quite a few guests on the show lately: Anthony Samaroff, Scott Horton, Mance Raider, Will Porter, and then this coming week will feature a 3-part series I did with the hosts of the Around the Empire podcast, Joanne Leone and Dan Wright. And we focus and really break down the entire Russiagate thing from the start with the indictments of Flynn, Papadopoulos, Manafort, Fusion GPS, the Steele dossier, the current IG report, Crossfire Hurricane. I mean, we go through the whole thing. And so for those of you who, because now there's been like 40 or so claims that say this time we know we got the proof that Trump colluded with the Russians to win the 2016 campaign and steal away from Hillary Clinton. Pretty much what we did is we had like a 2.5-hour talk about how none of that is true. So check that out, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. And it's also found at the libertarianinstitute.org, where you can now find the host of this State of the Libertarian Union's podcast, Liberty Weekly, and that's Pat MacFarlane. So Pat, tell us what you're up to lately. And I think I just saw an episode out by you today or yesterday.
That you did. Yeah. So also I have joined the Libertarian Institute. That happened a few weeks ago. However, unfortunately, I got really deep into my bar prep because I'm studying for the bar exam right now. So I got derailed a little bit. The Liberty Weekly podcast is on indefinite hiatus until I'm moving. I'm also taking the bar exam, like I said. So I did manage to get out an episode the other day. So I'm going to be intermittently posting stuff as I can. but I'm not doing guest interviews. I'm not doing anything super serious until I come back in August. But you can catch that at the libertarianinstitute.org as well. And so it's been really great experience. And I got to say, you know, publishing my content and seeing Ron Paul's articles sitting waiting to be published in the WordPress thing is like one of the greatest feelings I've ever had as a libertarian. So yeah, how's it going, you guys?
Well, Pat, can I actually ask you something? Since you haven't done a show on this kind of stuff, we've had a couple Supreme Court rulings recently, one dealing with the Fourth Amendment, as far as, you know, when the cell phone companies are holding your data, location data. And I think there's some real controversy over Gorsuch's because he dissented, saying that I guess they, you know, it's complicated, but do you want to go over that a little bit?
Yeah, I can actually. So I haven't had time really to get into it. I just from a cursory view was able to look at the issue in the case, and I did hear that it was ironically, and maybe this will be a jumping point for the rest of you guys. Ironically, it was the liberal justices who were joined by Justice Roberts. It was a 5-4 opinion, so it was very close, contentious. But ironically, it was the most liberal justices of the court that ruled in favor of protecting the Fourth Amendment, which I thought was funny because, you know, aren't conservatives supposed to be conserving our liberties, conserving the Fourth Amendment? You would think that would be the case, but no. I will say that just because a warrant is required won't necessarily protect your liberty. In fact, I've held search warrants in my hand for someone's entire Snapchat history. So nothing you do is safe. They will find probable cause. And yeah, that's the issue. And I'm just looking up the that Supreme Court ruling now. So, well, you guys one of you guys have any of you guys read the opinion?
No, I definitely have not read the opinion, but I will piggyback on something you just said. Just my experience when I was in law enforcement, you're absolutely right that merely because there is a requirement that a police officer obtain a search warrant, that does not protect your rights. However, it does protect them a little more than the ability for a warrantless search. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm happy anytime the state says that a warrant is necessary for some invasion of rights. But let me tell you, I mean, I could get a search warrant for, once I learned how to play the game and how to word the application for a search warrant, as long as I had some sort of shady evidentiary standard, I could get a warrant if I really needed it. The place where it really, the place where a requirement for a warrant really protects your liberty, sadly enough, is when it imposes a time or effort restriction on the law enforcement agency. And that warrant requirement then leads them to believe that it may not be worth their time. It's not that they couldn't do it. It's just that they don't want to put in the effort. That's where it really protects your freedoms. And that is really sad, but it is one extra layer that I mean, I'll be in favor of that. Yeah, definitely. I don't mean to say that this is, you know, that this isn't a great or a good holding, you know, but yeah, that was some great nuance that you added there. What do you think, Kyle? Yeah, you were going to say something.
I mean, the ruling seemed positive to me. Anytime, you know, the data is being protected, although, I mean, just, you know, to say, I would not assume that data is protected. And we know that on the federal level, especially, they do things like parallel construction where, you know, to avoid, I think, like the fruit of the poisonous tree, you know, kind of problem where, you know, they get evidence without warrant. Basically, the NSA gives them information and that they're constructing their own case. And so, you know, they say, you know, be here on this time and at this state. And they got that information, you know, from data without warrant. But then, you know, they go and they bust the people anyways. And they kind of get around those requirements. So, you know, I don't think it matters. I am really interested to see what Gorsuch was trying to do, because in his dissent, at least the little that I, you know, read of it that was like posted online, it seemed like his complaint was that that the justices that were ruling in favor and protecting the Fourth Amendment just weren't going far enough, and that they were invoking some past case that said that when a third party holds your information, you no longer have, like, I guess it's not considered, like, your property, and therefore the government doesn't need a warrant to seize it. And Gorsuch was saying that, rather than throw out that whole ruling, they just kind of ruled around it and did what the Supreme Court seems to be doing a lot of lately, and that's rather than making a strong decision, let's for the the little half measures so they could, I don't know, maybe keep that status of being impartial, or just because they're a bunch of unprincipled babies.
Yeah, well, I'd support that last sentiment that you just ended on. I mean, so I didn't really get a chance to sink my teeth into this. I've been so busy this weekend and just focusing on studying, but it seems to me it's very hard to trigger the exclusionary rule. And I was really depressed because I just kind of studied this in my bar prep, and it was really a depressing day because you really realize how the Fourth Amendment really functionally doesn't really mean that much anymore. And there's a lot of balancing tests that they use. So in some instances, the balancing test will be triggered by, like, what is the value of the evidence to the government versus what is the level of Fourth Amendment violation. And if the benefit to the government of getting the evidence in at trial is greater than the Fourth Amendment violation, they'll let it in. And even if there is, like, some fruit of the poisonous tree, that doesn't automatically trigger the exclusionary rule. And then I'm sure, as you know, Mike, there's a bunch of exigent circumstances, like, if the suspect is in flight, or, if evidence could be destroyed. That's the biggest one, especially when it comes to DWI blood draws, is that, the rate of alcohol dissipation is rather rapid. So we're just gonna, not get the search warrant for the blood draw because we really need to make sure that we get the blood draw. So we're just gonna throw out the warrant requirement. Yeah. So when it comes to that stuff, it's super depressing. But any more thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, so you nailed it right on the head. I mean, the exclusionary rule, I understand at its inception what it was meant to do. And for anyone who doesn't understand, basically the exclusionary rule says that if and when the government or its agents obtain evidence without regard for the restrictions set upon them in either the federal or state constitution, that evidence cannot be admitted into court. And then, as Patrick rightly brought up, over the course of time, the courts have invented all sorts of exceptions to the exclusionary rule so that they can bring this evidence back in, even though it was obtained not according to their own rules. So they don't play by their own rules, but will let the evidence in. So, one of them is evidence in the process of being destroyed. You mentioned in a DUI, your body metabolizes alcohol at a certain rate per hour. And so if getting a warrant would take 5 hours, and at the end of that 5 hours, the evidence is gone, well, then that's an exception to the exclusionary rule. You can go ahead and get the evidence, forcibly extract the evidence without waiting for a warrant. The other one, however, that I will bring up because I actually took part in this, and I'll go ahead and make this, a confessional here, that, one of the times that I was quite proud of my actions as a police officer at the time, although I'm not anymore, was for, of all things, a small amount of marijuana bust where, we had some information that some kids were smoking marijuana, and this was at a university, so it was in their dorm. And we went and knocked on the door, and we could clearly smell it. I mean, there's no question they were doing it. It was pretty obvious. And the proper routine is to knock on the door and see if you can get them to open the door. And then once they open the door, you sit there while you go to get a warrant because, at that point, they're not destroying evidence. So you have time. So you wait and you get the warrant. And that's what we did 99% of the time. However, this one time, the kids probably were pretty smart. Maybe they were pre-law. Maybe I don't know what they were doing, but they didn't say a word. We knocked, we could hear they were in there, but they didn't say anything. So we couldn't articulate that they were home. And all of a sudden, the odor of burning marijuana became stronger and stronger and stronger. And we realized that they were smoking it as fast as they could to get rid of the evidence. So we busted in. We used the evidentiary destruction exclusionary rule exception. And I remember making that call by myself and having to justify it to my bosses. And they were all so proud of me for knowing the case law and knowing when I could do it and when I couldn't and how to articulate it. And I just felt like super cop. And, there's so many things that could be said about that, really is the destruction of property and the complete disregard for someone's rights and their right to a search warrant. Is that really worth it for a small amount of marijuana? But as many police officers in states where marijuana is illegal, they think world one joint at a time. Anyways, it when you brought that up, that story came to mind, I figured you might find it entertaining.
Well, let me tell you another story. I was doing some legal work this week, actually, and I was working on this decision. It had to do with the car accident, and it had to do with the community caretaker function. And it's not only, like you said, there's so many different exceptions here. And one of them is the community caretaker function. And so there was a one vehicle accident one night in the county, and someone called it in. It was an empty car. The car was totaled. The driver's side doors were sheared off. The officer had determined that it looked like someone had been ejected from the vehicle, but there's no driver. And it's in the middle of the night, about 3:00. And so I hope I should try and make this story shorter because there's a lot of facts. But so they're looking for this guy. He's nowhere in sight. Well, they even call in the fire department to get like infrared to look in the woods and see if he's there hurt or something. They can get his heat signature. So they have that ability to do that. But it turns out they go to his residence that they got from his vehicle registration, and it was like 12 miles away. And when they get there, there's one officer that gets there, and he's observing the house, and the lights are on. And so the officer goes up to the door. He's knocking on it. No answer, no answer. He goes back to the squad car to call the house and see if anyone's home. Well, then he sees the suspect walking around naked in the living room and goes into a different room. And so the officer then scales the deck to look into the building and see that the suspect is naked in bed. And so then he walks around and he goes to the front door. He announces himself. He goes into the front door. And as he opens the door, announces himself, he can hear some moaning coming from the bedroom. So then he says, "Police department, police," he walks up and he asks the guy if he needed an ambulance. And long story short, yes, he did. He did ask for an ambulance. And now his attorney is filing a motion to suppress because it was a Fourth Amendment violation, allegedly. There was not probable cause to believe that the community caretaker function would be triggered. And so they're trying to suppress this evidence. They're saying it was a Fourth Amendment violation, violating the plain view doctrine for the police officer to scale the balcony because that would be manipulating the scene, and you can't do that. And so he looks in, and ultimately, according to the law, there was reason to believe that this person was in need of help. So long story short, it was a pretty entertaining set of facts, but the correct legal decision was not to suppress the search just because the community caretaker function. So there's so many different things in play, and they're going to manipulate the facts, and more likely than not, the evidence is coming in, So I hope that wasn't too long.
No. I mean, look, not to bore everyone, I think you and I could probably talk about this all day and all night. I mean, I have a history in this, and you're studying, for your bar exam, but at the end of the day, you're right that the point that we need to take away from this is that simply requiring a search warrant doesn't necessarily protect your rights.
Yes.
They can always think of ways to to craft language in their reports and in their testimony in court and things like that. And that's just the way it works. So I'm with everyone else here. I think we've all voiced our support of the fact that the warrant requirement in this instance was upheld. That's a good thing. Ultimately, it's better than not. But we shouldn't be shouting from the rooftops that, oh, the Supreme Court did it. They protected us. I don't think that's quite true either.
Yeah. They'll just get the warrant in any way, or they'll, figure something out where the warrant requirement doesn't apply. So,
right. Yeah. There's still so many exceptions for them. They'll figure out one way.
Yeah. Well, so sorry if that was an aside, but, I do have like a kind of a theory about the sitting Supreme Court, and I don't know how accurate it is. I haven't thought too much about it, but I think that they are purposely avoiding making serious political decisions right now. And the Supreme Court is not supposed to make political decisions, but they do all the time. So, but I think they're avoiding it. With the Masterpiece Cake decision, they totally just whiffed on it, and now this decision comes down, and I haven't gotten a chance to read it, but it's just kind of confusing. I think maybe they tangibly sense how divided the country is right now, so they're trying to tread very lightly because they know their own role in causing divisiveness in this country. What do you guys think about that? Do we still have Daniel on the line?
Oh. We do. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. I turned my video off because, it's not too pretty out here. But, you guys talk about a lot of the legal issues, and I'm a layperson. I know the law from movies. So from my perspective, it seems to me that a lot of what you're talking about kind of plays into the there's the by the book and there's the following through on what's the case law and what's permitted and what's not. And because it does bind the hands of law enforcement and the prosecution, I think that's one of the reasons why they push so hard for plea deals, right? Because they don't want things to go to trial, because then things would have to be entered into evidence. So prior to that, I think that they can kind of like threaten you with a whole bunch of charges, like they'll overcharge and have a bunch of, a laundry list of things that they're threatening you with, and they tell you you're going to go away for X amount of time. But if you just, cop a plea, then they'll go easy on you and whatever. Does that play a role? And is it a reaction to case law and precedents that actually does bind them, to the letter of the law? Whether they can work around that or not, it kind of sounds like, yeah, there are ways around that, but that doesn't really become an issue until somebody really goes to trial, right? And trial is what, 5% of cases?
Yeah, I would say that, except pre-trial, or well, not exactly pre-trial, but like the discovery period before you get to trial is filled with motions, and during this time the defense counsel will be challenging the probable cause for certain charges, or they will be filing motions to dismiss and arguing it based on that. So I don't think it's a matter of overcharging just as much as it really, the whole thing is just kind of stacked in the state's favor, I think, even though they do have the higher burden. Yeah, that's just pontificating at this point, because I don't have too much experience to draw from. So,
well, yeah. I can tell you from a training, what I was trained to do in law enforcement, and it does align with what Daniel was kind of talking about. They taught us, and this was not even an unwritten teaching. This was a blatant directive in the academy and also during field training at my department, that when you catch someone for something, you charge them with every crime that applies. Even if some of them might seem to overlap, charge them with everything. Charge them with the highest grade that you can possibly think that you could prove. And the reason they told us that is they said, well, don't worry, it's going to get pleaded down later. The courts will weed out all that other stuff. Just charge them with everything that you think you can charge them with. And then, magically, whatever's appropriate is what will stick. But the reason I think that teaching exists in the first place is precisely the reason that Daniel was talking about, is that they know that, number one, there's going to be plea deals. Number two, there's an intimidation factor, right? I mean, if you don't charge them, and this is an extreme example, by the way, I never charged anyone with murder in the first degree, but I'll use it. If I charge you with murder in the first degree, maybe that's an incentive for you to plead to manslaughter, right? And then I don't have to go to court and I don't have to actually prove it, right? You have to prove just enough of it to scare someone. That definitely does play a role, although I cannot say, I think it would be irresponsible for me to say that that malicious level of intentional intimidation is present in every overcharging instance, but overcharging is definitely done. Multiple charges for the same offense, and we'll just see what sticks.
Yeah. Well, and the burden is low too. I mean, it's probable cause, and probable cause, contrary to what you would think probable cause means, because probable means you would think more likely than not. So if you would visualize it, you would think that probable cause would mean 51% probability of it being true. Probable cause is actually, I don't know, I hesitate to assign a percentage point, but it would be around 35 or 40% probability of it being true. And
so
that's exactly right.
More like possible cause.
Yeah, that's right. In the police academy, they taught us about all these burdens of proof, whether it's reasonable suspicion, which, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, as I recall, reasonable suspicion was somewhere around 20%. Yeah. You think maybe there's 15 to 20% chance this person's involved, and that's what requires the state, that's the burden the state has to prove in order to stop and question you legally. And then probable cause is what's necessary for an arrest or for charges to be filed. And then in civil court, you talk about preponderance of the evidence, which that is the 51%, right?
Correct.
Like in order to win in civil court, you have to prove guilt beyond a preponderance of the evidence, which is just 51%. And then from there is next clear and convincing.
Yeah,
which is like 60 to 70%.
Yeah, the burdens are tough even for law students too.
Yeah. So my understanding, and I welcome if someone later corrects me on this. I'm thinking, oh gosh, more than a decade ago. So clear and convincing would be the next standard of evidence, and this is not necessarily to prove someone's guilt. This is what the court uses on themselves when they start enacting rules and whether or not evidence can come in under certain circumstances, and that would be like roughly a 60 to 70% assurance. And then I believe the next one I was taught was beyond reasonable doubt, which is what's necessary for a conviction. And it's funny, growing up, I thought beyond reasonable doubt meant like 99.99%, but I was taught it in the police academy. It's more like 85 to 90%.
Mm-hmm. Well,
does that match up with what you learned in law school?
Well, so it's preponderance of the evidence, clear and convincing. There's a lot of other standards like clear error or abuse of discretion, but those are things for when the court's dealing with itself. But even visualizing it in terms of percentage points can be inaccurate because they have articulations of what these things mean, and it's just kind of a different way of thinking about it. So I wouldn't always visualize it in terms of like percentage points, but the rules of evidence themselves have a liberal thrust. So for each jurisdiction you have what are called the rules of evidence, and I have my it's in my backpack, but I have my copies of the rules of evidence. They're a liberal thrust and they lean towards admittance. And I kind of got into this with Kyle on my episode where we were talking about FBI entrapment schemes, but just talking about, the purpose of the rules of evidence and the nature in criminal history of, why we don't admit certain types of evidence. So there is a liberal thrust, but think of it from the perspective of someone being charged. You are taking a major roll of the dice to go to trial, and it is, it's easier than you would think to secure a conviction if you're the prosecution. It's not easy, but it isn't impossible. And if you're the defendant and you're facing a felony charge and you're going to take it to trial, there's a 20% chance you'll be convicted. Theoretically speaking, depending on the facts of the case. But I mean, is that a chance that you would like to take? If someone offers to plead you down from a felony to a misdemeanor or a gross misdemeanor, you'd probably take that. You'd probably take it, especially if they would drop one of the counts. You would probably take that.
Absolutely.
And it is I can't remember whether a plea deal is a contractual agreement or not, whether it's considered a contract. But yeah, you could have a whole nother conversation about the validity of plea deals. Whether that should be upheld under freedom of contract if someone voluntarily wants to agree to a lesser charge. But what do you think, Kyle? We haven't heard from you, haven't thrown the ball to you in a while.
Well, I mean, I think an important part of plea deals is especially when the person taking the plea deal is then becoming an informant, because then you're looking at somebody who has a real incentive to, testify to whatever they're going to testify, because that's going to reduce their jail time. I mean, think about it. If you told somebody, I'm going to give you $500,000 to go to court and testify, you would say, this might be getting into the range of bribery and there can be some real problems here. And yet you could have people that honestly plead down, and save 50 years of their life from being in jail or not, to go to court and say something. And so I think this is something we talked a little bit on our show. This is something that I also talked a little bit about on the Russiagate show, just, kind of what happened with Michael Flynn and George Papadopoulos. I mean, both of these guys were facing serious time. And so then they take a deal from the Mueller investigation, agree to testify against Trump. And now, rather than doing decades in jail, and in Flynn's case, I think his son would have definitely been with, a potential target. And so it's a very serious, kind of a thing. And I think, having the plea deals is pretty ineffective, and it creates a lot of potential for bad motivation and bad actors. I mean, we always want to pretend like it's what you see in the mafia movies, right? Where the police get a low-level guy to flip on his boss. And yeah, he doesn't go away, 3 years for that bank robbery, but his boss goes away for 50 for, all the hits he ordered. But in reality, it probably ends up going the other way a little bit more than that. You know what I mean? Where the big bosses never go down anyways. And, the people who get thrown under the bus by these informants are typically the type of people we talked about in the episode where you appeared on my show. They're these not so bright, potentially mentally ill loners who, kind of get sucked up by informants. And, those informants right now, what they're giving the FBI are terrorist plots. And, the FBI could use that, turn it into propaganda. It ups their funding. And, some poor kid takes a 20-year plea, deal sentence rather than, going down for terrorism and, spending his life in jail.
Yeah. It's
and imagine, because I'm sure they tell these kids, hey, like, you're 18, 19, 20 years old. You take this sentence, 20 years, maybe you get out in 15 for good behavior. You're 35 or 40 at that time. You still have a little bit of a life left. Or you go to trial, they convict you, and you never, walk as a free man again. I mean, I'm not saying that I would take the plea deal, but I'm saying that, like, I would never want to be in that position to, be making those decisions with my life or not. But, maybe you do take the deal. I could definitely see the scenario where I say 2 years versus, or, 15 years versus the rest of my life. At least another day I'll, get to walk and breathe a free man.
Well, yeah, and it's a very scary situation. And I'll tell you what, no one on the other side of that, interrogation table, or very few of them have ever been in the position that suspects are in. That's what I like to say too, is that, most people who aren't afraid about police abuse have never been on the receiving end of police contact. They've never been suspected of a crime. They've never had to deal with the police. They've never been charged with anything. They've never been through the court system. They've never been in jail before, with exception because, there's plenty of cops that have criminal history. Before I move on, I wanted to make a note on the rules of evidence. The rules of evidence do have a liberal thrust, but those rules of evidence don't always affect the Fourth Amendment balancing considerations that the court would make. So I just want to make that clear. But yeah, I mean, in our town currently, there was a police officer who was caught on the job stalking his ex-girlfriend and threatening her and kind of like riding around. Not fired. I think he was put on administrative leave. But now he was having a restraining order filed against him. And it was a big deal. The hearing happened last week, and it took all morning. But the big deal is, if the restraining order is filed, he's no longer allowed to carry a service weapon. And, the allegations are of abuse and of sexual abuse, a sexual assault within a relationship. But yeah, I mean, what does it take to have someone suspended? If your police officer is being accused, not formally, but being accused of sexual misconduct and has a restraining order action pending against them, that's not even enough just to put them on, suspended leave. I don't know.
That's a tough one to me. I mean, look, I'm gonna take this question and treat it as if we're talking about a different occupation. Because I think that's the only fair way to answer it, because I think everyone here, we all have an aversion to the police, which is hilarious from my perspective, having been a police officer. But
that we're such good friends.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've made a 180 in my views, so that's not super surprising. But a lot of times when people ask me to analyze situations, whether or not, let's say it's a use of deadly force and it was a police officer who did it, and they say, well, what do you think about this? Or in this scenario, someone's accused of some violent crime, some awful violent crime, what does it take for them to get taken off the job? I like to analyze it as if the person was not a police officer, because I think that's the fair way to do it, right? Say, well, if this was anyone else, what would we do, right? And so the reason this is a tough one for me is that I do believe that you should be considered innocent until proven guilty. Now, that does not stop a private employer, and I don't think it should stop a public employer from taking you off of their service, whether paid or unpaid, until those allegations can be proven or until your name can be cleared. And that's what I would advocate in a situation like this. I mean, as the employer, I think you do have a responsibility to have some sort of internal investigation very quickly to determine, does this allegation merit an administrative suspension? And it might suck for that person if they didn't do it and they're being accused of something they didn't do and they get an unpaid suspension. That would be awful. And that would be, in addition to dragging your name through the mud, you might not be able to care for your family. But that's why you should have backup, means of taking care of you and your family in the community, whether it's religious or family or what have you. That's exactly why those other organizations exist, is to help you out in your time of need. And if I was the private employer, or if I was the city manager or the mayor or whatever position, I would have no problem saying, look, I'm not saying you're guilty. I'm saying that there's enough of a problem here that we need to take you off for service for a while. That's where I come down on it. But I do recognize that we should still treat anyone innocent until proven guilty.
Right. Yeah. And I thought, the way you started that, saying, look at it as if a different occupation. I work in a school, and I had a coworker who, he said like 10 years ago, one day, his boss came to him and said, hey, I need you to leave. You're not going to be coming in for a few days. They do an investigation. The claims against him were like clearly fraudulent. I mean, they were like young kids who like made up a ridiculous story, like this guy offered to take him to his private island. And of course, here he is, a teacher who drives a minivan, right? Like he doesn't have a private island or anything like that. So like 3 days later, he comes back to work. They explain to him what happened. And of course, they, give him like time off, like he got, paid, after the fact. They give them the money. And I would say that's how you handle these kind of things, especially when it's somebody who's going to be in a position of power. I mean, if this police officer is allowed to continue to move around the community in his job as a law enforcement officer, having as much as we disagree with it, I mean, he has rights that the rest of us don't have, and that the girl that he's harassing doesn't have. And so for a temporary thing, or maybe find a desk job for him for a couple weeks or something like that. But you definitely gotta like take the guy off the streets. And I'm sure like if you do an internal investigation, and if you could count on the police departments to be somewhat honest, you could probably figure out fairly quickly like if these claims are legitimate, and if this guy's unfit to carry a service weapon. I know the trial may take longer, but you would think some kind of internal investigation would be able to sort this matter out in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and then you're also getting into a bunch of small town politics as well. And I my family personally knows this guy, and I don't know how well they know him, or how well they know how serious the allegations are, or if they have a chance of being true. It's actually super duper traumatic and drama filled, because they know both parties, both the accused and the other side of the relationship too. So I don't know, it's just super interesting, but it's the talk of the town, and there was the hearing for the restraining order and it was not granted. So the next day he showed up for work and he was working. So, but there is talk of sexual assault charges being filed too. And I think they are going to be filed. So I wonder what will happen once those charges are pending, but yeah, just stupid small town stuff. I think if you were going to compare it to the private sector, you would also have to compare it to like a position that had like some kind of duty like that, a power situation. I don't know exactly what it would be. Maybe if it would, maybe like a school counselor or someone, or I don't know, a security officer.
You could even think like a nurse at a nursing home, or
okay, that was what I was thinking.
I mean, there are plenty of examples in the private sector of people who have significant positions of authority and power over people who are either temporarily or permanently incapacitated, or have less power than the person who works for, supposed to be caring for them, supposed to be looking after them. I mean, right in your wheelhouse, even a lawyer client relationship. You could look at the priesthood. You could look at at any of these areas where someone is thought to have not just a position of power but a position of care, because that's ultimately what the state wants you to think of their security service, is that they're there to care for you and protect you, and they work in your best interest. There's plenty of analogies in the private sector for that.
Yep. They were failing me in the moment.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, I think the irony of what all those occupations you just listed, I think they're rife with abuse.
They are. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good
point.
Well,
we could get into the statistics of each one of those, but we'll save that for another one.
Yeah. Yeah, well, what do you guys think? Kyle?
Oh, I was just gonna kick it over to Daniel and ask. I think, have you done your show on The Incredibles yet, or is that the one coming out soon? I see you talking about in the chat.
Oh yeah, so we did The Incredibles on our most recent episode that came out last week. It's our Father's Day special, episode 81.
Should I go see
Anarchy it? Podcast. Well, it's the original, so we didn't actually do the second one. My wife and I, we have our anniversary coming up, and we're going to go see Incredibles 2 with the kids. So that's going to be like a family date night. So we're well prepped for that. And then the episode that just came out today is Jurassic Park, the original as well, because The Lost World Fallen Kingdom is just coming out, and it's also the 25th anniversary of Jurassic Park. So we're trying to be more timely with the SEO and the Google search results, so we're going to do stuff that people are looking for, even if it's just the original or the classic classic Coke version.
So I guess based on the first Incredibles movie, do you have a hope that the second one is going to have any good themes in it, or is there anything that maybe you're looking for or hoping to see?
Well, I've heard good things about about the second one. The first one we were pretty happy with. There was a lot of analysis from a libertarian perspective that gave us plenty to chew on. One of the villain in the first one, his goal is to basically become an entrepreneur through somewhat nefarious means to make everyone have access to superpower ability, and thus making everyone equal. So it's a bit of an egalitarian thing, but everyone's like becoming supermen. Um, so they say it's a way of if everyone's special, then nobody's special, and it gets into the Ayn Randian ideas of the human mind and progress being made by people who are entrepreneurial and who have taken things on their own and turned them into something, taken matter and organized them in ways that serve their fellow man, where the selfishness is actually a virtue. So there's a lot of themes that are running through that, and I think that the second one is also going to be pretty good. So I'm looking forward to that. And then one other thing I wanted to mention is you guys were talking about the evidentiary and trials and things of that nature. And we had done a movie called Find Me Guilty. And we also had a conversation with the Don't Waste Your Hate guys about that. And a lot of the, it's based on a true story and actually has dialogue directly from the trial. And one of the things that became very apparent is that they were trying to railroad the guy to flip on his boss, or the mob boss, and he was willing to go down for whatever they were charging him with. And the only real evidence they had were people that they offered plea deals to turn state's evidence and basically just keep supplying them with drugs. And so it was like literally a bribe situation where they're putting these junkies up on the stand, and that's the strongest evidence that they have against this guy. So it's a really it's a quite good movie. It's very obscure. It did really terrible at the box office. So it's kind of hard to find. You can't even stream it anywhere. I had to buy a used DVD copy on Amazon. So go to actualanarchy.com and click on an Amazon link and then search for Find Me Guilty. It is a good film. And then check out our episode. I forget which episode it is. It's maybe 71 or 2 or something like that. My wife has brought me more wine. Thank you, wife. All right, so let's go to you, Kyle, because I know that you've got a limited time that you can be with us tonight, and then we'll probably end up winding down pretty soon here. But you mentioned you have a bunch of shows lined up, ready to come out. Here's my question. I know Pat has talked about maybe changing the format of his show, and he was looking to you as a model. And so I'm wondering if that might spark some conversation here, because you are a workhorse and you get, 5 shows out a week? It's like 20 minutes to 30 minutes, and it's just chock full of information. What can we learn from that? What can we lean on each other to do to improve our craft and make the members of the Libertarian Union more popular, more successful, have more impact?
Well, I mean, I only do 3 episodes a week. So unlike Stephen Clyde, who, Peace and Liberty podcast, another Libertarian Union show, is incredible workhorse. But I do put out 3 shows a week, usually between 20 and 30 minutes. If I go with interviews, I go longer. I think the real thing that just makes me able to turn out the shows is I do the daily news roundup that you can find at Libertarian Institute. And it's right there on the top right widget on the homepage. You'll find it. And so it makes my show prep pretty easy, so I could run through stuff. And it's basically just that, if I'm not doing a show, I'm typically reading. And that I think that's just one of the ways I'm able to kind of keep up with it so fast and to kind of turn out the shows like I do. The other thing, I think that the most helpful thing that I've learned is that you just can't be a perfectionist. You can't get upset every time you don't explain something just the right way you want to, because you're never going to do it. And you're always going to leave out a detail. You're always going to leave out a fact. You're always going to forget a footnote. You're going to say whatever else way too many times. And so, just find ways to kind of simplify your process. And I do like doing the shorter shows, like, 20 to 30 minutes rather than doing something longer, just because I think that's probably what the attention span of my audience is. And so I find that to be effective. I think if I'm doing like, consistently 45-minute, hour-long shows on just like the Afghan war, people are just going to get dull with it. When I bring on guests, I feel like I could do a little bit longer just because, there's other voices, there are other ideas. Maybe there's a little bit of debate or discussion, or just, people making points that I would never thought of before from different perspectives. So those would be my recommendations. I also find doing the guest episodes being easier as far as it goes for me. Just as far as like the amount of like actual energy I have to put in the show, may be about the same amount of time, but it's definitely less energy.
Yeah, those are all good points that you've made, and I think that will help, because I know that the two guys that we've got on the line with us here have had life hit them fast at times, and so I know Battle for Liberty took a bit of a hiatus, and now you've come up with 2 or 3 episodes since you had that break, and then Patrick, you're going through the bar and buying the house and all those things, so you're looking at ways to take a bit of a break and then come back with, something in a niche and maybe an easier format, something along those lines. I know we made a shift at the beginning of the year where we moved towards reducing the amount of time that our shows are. They were typically going, an hour and a half or 2 hours. We cut it down to about an hour. We cut back on guests. We created the normie-friendly version. And for us, when we're talking about a movie, I mean, it feels like we're really just getting going, and then it's like an hour has happened. So it's actually in a way made the cream rise, I think, because now we're cognizant of that time limit, and so we have to let some of the superfluous stuff go and really just focus on some main points. And I think that gives our show a little bit more of an impact and a little bit to where we're primed as in preparation for and in actually doing the show, like making sure that we're saying what we want to say. I harken it back to my old days as being a bit of a photographer. When I was shooting film, I had 24 or 36 exposures. I was very selective about what I was going to photograph. As soon as I switched over to digital, I could fit, a few thousand pictures on my camera at any given time, so I was just shooting willy-nilly. At the editing room, that became a huge problem. When I had a couple of rolls of film to deal with, it was very easy because I took the time to selectively choose precisely what I wanted to shoot. Whereas, with the digital, I was just flooded with an abundance of content, scrolling through things and trying to find something that was good because my standards had dropped significantly as a result of just being able to spray and pray. So that's kind of my take on it. I'm going to shift it over to Mike, because you did have that hiatus and then you have started dialing it back in. What have you changed since the 8 months that you're taking forward with the show? And maybe that can be another model for Patrick to look at.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I had a long hiatus with, I think, 1 or 2 episodes, maybe in all of 8 months. And prior to that, I had 18 months of an episode every single week. And that was always the goal for me, as a weekly episode. And, so then that big long break was pretty depressing for me. Maybe depressing is the wrong word. I would say disappointing is a little bit more accurate. I was disappointed that I wasn't putting out content. I will say one thing I've learned through all this, though, that I'm trying to spread as much as I can, is that as an amateur podcaster, really, it's okay to take a break. It really is. It's okay. Take a break, focus on your family, focus on your life. I really took the words of Tom Woods, and I can't remember who he was parroting when he did this, but when he gave that speech, finding liberty in an unfree world. And, his point was to focus on the things that matter and to focus on your family and to, to find liberty in ways other than political. And so for the last 8 months, I really have I convinced myself that, if I'm not educating my 17 listeners about liberty every single week, that's okay. I'm educating my children. I'm making sure my family is okay. I'm making sure we're financially stable. And then when I came back, I was pleasantly surprised that my listeners were still there. I've even received 2 separate emails since I've come back with, I think, 3 episodes in the last 4 weeks. I've gotten emails from people saying, hey, it's great to have you back. Really enjoy what you're putting out again. I thought your podcast had faded off into obscurity. I'm really glad that it hasn't. And that just proved to me right there that, podcast listeners will come back. Not all of them, certainly. You will lose some if you're not doing regular content. There's wisdom to that. But to answer your question, really all I've changed so far is a little bit of what Kyle already spoke about. I mean, I was nodding my head when you were talking about this, Kyle. My obsession with perfection, with a scripted out episode for 30 to 40 minutes, I've done away with that. I have bullet points at the most right now. I let myself get away with the ums and the ahs and the pauses, and I do a little bit of editing, but not as much as I used to do. I'm also trying to keep my episodes short, and I'm also trying to keep them much more focused and on point. So I'm letting myself, as I go through my day, if I think of a topic that I say, you know what, that would be a really cool thing to expound upon for 10 to 15 minutes, I'll just sit down and talk about it for 10 minutes, and that's it. I haven't had a 10-minute episode yet, but I'm telling you, it's coming. I skipped Friday of this last week because of, a ton of, actually, this was vacation. I was on vacation with my wife and kids. So, I skipped on Friday. But this week, I probably will put an episode out on Friday. I'll tell you right now, I don't know what it's going to be about, but I can almost promise it's going to be something that just strikes me over the next couple of days. I'm going to sit down right in this room and bang out a 10-minute episode with no script and just keep it to the point. And I feel like my listeners probably will appreciate that. So that's been my strategy lately. I'm hoping that makes my show a little bit more sustainable than it was previously.
Yeah, that's great. And just about that Tom Woods episode, it was episode 858. So you can find that at tomwoods.com/858. And the reason I know that is because that is the episode where he plugged my websites at the end.
That's
so be sure to stick around. Stick around to the end. 858. Yep.
That's great.
And then
I love that.
The other thing I wanted to mention is, Patrick has often said that he has a bit of a nostalgic feel for our episodes because our audio has been so terrible. And I think it has improved over time. I went through 5 or 6 different microphones, got a mixer, I put up sound conditioning and other things into my studio/office. But the biggest change that we made recently, and this is also a suggestion by Pat, was moving to Google Hangouts for our recording. And that has taken us to the next level as far as our audio quality. And we have borne fruit from that. Our weekly stats from this last week, we just switched to this like the last 2 or 3 episodes. I know The Incredibles is on the new stuff. Jurassic Park's on the new stuff. I think the one prior to that is also on the new stuff. Our downloads jumped from a few hundred up to 1,000 this past week. And so, I mean, if you guys are struggling with audio, switch to this format, and we've got an output from the mixer that splits off the headphone jack that goes into another computer. I'm plugging straight into Audacity, and it's gone baller. We have baller level recording right now, and I'm really, really happy because we've been doing the show for like 2.5 years, and we finally we're in the big boy pants.
Do you think, and to sell that even more, I record on the first floor of a 3-story apartment building. Everything in here is hard-footed floors and wood. It's 1 bedroom. I'm out in the kitchen. I don't even have a microphone stand. I put my microphone on butts. I plug it into my laptop, and my audio quality is not that bad. So it's easy enough to do.
So yeah, kind of piggybacking on what Kyle's saying, Dan, I really don't want to discount everything you just said. I have to tell you, your audio is amazing compared to what it was when I first started listening. But I don't necessarily know that there's a causal relationship between that and your download numbers. I would guess that it has much more to do with your strategic episode placement prior to movies coming out. Specifically Incredibles and Jurassic Park. I mean, right before these major anticipated sequels come out, you're putting out reviews of their predecessors. correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, do you think that probably has something to do with it more than just the audio? I think the audio plays a part, but I think the strategic timing is maybe a bigger factor.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the experiment has too many variables and we're not controlling for any of them. So
Yep.
multivariate analysis might be able to help us there. I think that the audio quality will help keep listeners who have joined, new listeners who may have come to us because we're doing more relevant content. But I'm just happy with the increase in the numbers, and hopefully that can continue. We have our next episode is 3 billboards outside of Ebbing, Missouri, so that's not really super relevant, though it was really good. Maybe it came out last year. And then we're going to do the Harry Potter, the first one after that, because it's the 20th anniversary. So we are trying to get a little bit more relevant. I know, right? Does that make you feel old?
I was just gonna say, the fact that I even just said 20 years, I'm old.
Fuck.
Yeah, my wife and I were talking about it in the car, and I was like, it probably doesn't feel that long ago because they made like 8 of these things, and the last one came out, less than 10 years ago. So,
Wait,
but yeah, the first one
movie came out 20 years ago. Oh my god!
Yeah, Harry Potter, the very first one. Yeah.
Quick Harry Potter trivia. So it was called. Who knows? I know what it was called, but who knows what it was called here in the U.S.? Harry Potter and the
Sorcerers in the U.S. and Philosophers Everywhere.
Hey, you got it. Okay, Kyle knows it's Harry Potter.
See, I just remember when the first one came out, and then you'd hear about the adult title derivatives, and it was Harry Twatter.
Jeez.
Could I put a little note about like the process of my show and what I've found helpful and stuff? So I think what Mike said was really insightful about taking a break, and putting the show aside for the last 2 weeks has been freaking awesome. I really got burned out. I don't know if I was trying way too hard, if I was using it to avoid studying or using it to avoid thinking about law school. That's really what the show was, I think, in the beginning, just because law school bored the hell out of me at times. And I thought, why am I doing this? Why are they making me do all this stuff? This is so stupid and waste my time, which was, I don't know. That is what it is. But a few points. I really, it's really good for us, I think, and maybe just good for me to not really look or read at the comments of what people say, because you really have to. I think that was a big factor of me getting burnt out and feeling like I wasn't making a difference, because, there's always going to be people out there that disagree with you, and we really are putting ourselves out there a lot of the time. And so like, you can't really, put yourself out there and then be upset when someone says, no, you're wrong. But there really is a difference between, constructive opinions and shit posting, I think. And then, you have to value the opinions of people who really watch your show and who know what you're about, because you'll get a random person that will drop in, and without context of anything you say, they'll just do whatever. But I don't know, doing the show has made me really, really be wary of libertarians and libertarianism. And I think that's kind of like a negative impact of doing the show. And I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that, because I've really, really been losing patience with people. I don't know if that's the internet or if it's social media. I don't want to say that I'm like adverse to talking to people and stuff, but at the same time, a lot of this stuff is watch the video and you'll know, or yes, I've said, I've spoken out about that tons of times, or no, you really are not understanding what I'm saying, or your argument is bullshit and here's why. And then you just go into this big thing. So another thing that I wanted to mention to you guys was just trying to schedule out the podcasts and your production time. So instead of falling into this black hole of working on an episode for 6 hours, you really set out a time limit for what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. And do you do this, Kyle? Was a question, or Mike? for you guys. Or Daniel, do you set out a time and a time limit? Daniel, maybe not you, because I think I know what you do, the same as me.
Well, maybe I'll answer that because I'm actually running into my time limit here and I'm going to go. So, I mean, I don't like have a strict time limit for my show, but I just, sit down, I hit record, and I usually think like, this is going to take, 45 minutes or however long. And, some days it's just not going well. I mean, for whatever reason, you're not articulate and you can't remember the facts you need to remember. And so at those times, I just like, take a break. I walk away from it for a half hour. If I feel better and come back to it, I do. If not, there is, even for me, sometimes I have to accept that I'm not going to get every single episode out in the morning, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday morning. Some are going to have to come out in the afternoons just because, I wasn't feeling up to it the day before. I will say, Pat, I think, the big thing for me on not feeling burnt out is that I don't interact with people like just on Facebook. I have my private Facebook group, Foreign Policy Focus. I have other private groups where I'm good friends with, the people in the group, and, I do have discussions with them, but I don't just like get into like hacky arguments on people's Facebook walls. I mean, we have podcasts here, guys, where, we're talking to tens, if not hundreds of people every time we put something out. And I'm not going to spend 3 hours of my life arguing with some moron about something that they don't understand. Even when I provide the evidence of what I'm saying, I'm like, here, it's in the Washington Post, it's in the New York Times, I got this from Reuters. I'm not, going to Alice Jones InfoWars or anything like that. And they say, yeah, but blah, blah. Not worth my time anymore. I enjoy my show, and I think part of the reason why is I don't engage in that. Now, there have been times where people have sent me messages, and at times they've provided me with new information, and I think there's even been once or twice where they've, kind of told me, hey, like, you got this wrong. And then I'm able to go back and figure out, why I got that wrong and for what reason or whatever else. But I mean, we know when conversations are going to be productive. If the guy starts, out with, you're wrong about everything, or, oh my God, you're not a real libertarian, then I just ignore the rest of it. Because that's 90% of what it is. And it's just a waste of our precious time that could be used reaching a lot more people than getting into it. It just brings you down and it sucks the life out of you. It really does. And so I would say, yes, specifically with Facebook. Twitter, I find a little bit more highbrow for whatever reason, as bad as that sounds. Like, I mean, like, people are either pretty quickly identified as trolls on Twitter, or you're having a legitimate discussion. And so if it's not a legitimate discussion, just disengage. But I'm going to sign off here. For those of you who want to check out my work, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. I mentioned I have that 3-part series. Actually, if you go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus, and you donate to the show, you could get that full interview now before even the first episode comes out, but you don't have to wait for all 3, and you could listen to it all as the 2.5-hour marathon conversation that I had with Dan Wright and Joanne Leone. And so, I really appreciate it. Had a great time talking to y'all tonight, and hopefully I'll get together with you guys soon.
Yeah, great points, Kyle. Thank you for that. Yeah, so what do you guys think?
Well, I go for it, Mike.
I'll kind of echo what Kyle just got done saying. As you were talking about kind of the struggles that you've had, number one, don't worry, I've been there as well. But number two, I think it's really important to very quickly determine whether or not the person that's commenting is worth your time. I even find that I'm getting sucked back into Facebook, even in the one private group that we're all in together. I find myself arguing with people. Let me provide some background. I was on Facebook years and years and years and years ago, and I was friends with everybody I knew, all my family, all my high school friends, everybody. And just about after I graduated college, I dropped Facebook because I noticed that I was just diving into this black hole of constant arguing and constant trying to back up claims that I made or whatever political assertions that I made to people that I just don't care about anymore. And at the time, it was a radical thing to do, but I deleted Facebook, like completely deleted Facebook, got off of it, got off Twitter, got off everything. And I stayed off for probably 4 or 5 years, and I felt awesome. And so when I came back to Facebook, I promised myself that it would only be because I was running a podcast and I had to have a Facebook page. And then I got into the Tom Woods elite group, and that still is a lot of fun. I really enjoy that group. But now I look at my Facebook and I see that I'm part of like 6 groups, and I still don't talk to people privately on my, just person to person, but I'm starting to get sucked back in again. And it's because I'm having that same problem, is that I'm not properly judging who's worth talking to, who's worth my time. I'm right back into that almost social media addiction, where the minute I sit down, if I don't have something to do, without even thinking about it, my phone is in my hand and I'm on Facebook. Why? There's so many better things I could be doing with my time. It's just not a healthy thing. So I'm gearing up to significantly reduce interaction online again, because I think it's going to be good for me. Have either of you ever dropped social media for that reason? I mean, I know it could just be that I'm a dysfunctional human being, but
I'll chime in here. I actually got off Facebook for a couple of years, or at least just let it lay dormant for a while. I still had a profile, but I just didn't go on there for 2 or 3 years. Then I started doing a show and started using it again as a vehicle to help promote the show. Got in the Tom Woods group, met a bunch of you guys and a bunch of other cool people. My legacy friends were all, progressive semi-socialists from Seattle, from, music scene and photographers and whatnot. And nowadays, probably, over half of my friends list is all libertarians or ANCAPs. I do tend to get sucked into Facebook debates, but not on my own page, but on a person who her Facebook page is Anarchist Mom. Her name's Melanie, and she has
I know
attraction.
exactly.
Yeah,
well, I'm convinced she's a troll account.
No, she's real. She's real.
Then how does every single one of her friends? I can't even read her stuff anymore, because every single person that comments on what she posts is like, you can't possibly like this woman,
right? They hate her.
So why are they? Okay, I'm sorry. This is me having a character flaw. I can't read her page anymore because I get too frustrated.
Right. So I go in there just to I know Kung Fu now. I am so good at this, knocking these people around.
I have seen you just destroy them, and it's kind of cathartic.
Yeah, and I keep trying to quit, because it is a bit of a time suck, and I have scaled back a bit, but it is just so satisfying sometimes to put these people in their place. But I think that she has an attraction by these people because of her Facebook URL, and so she's attracting these left anarchists because they're confused as to what she's allegedly, what they expect, right? And so then she'll put a lot of she's also a bit of a shit poster. She puts a lot of bait out there, right? A lot of free market and libertarian type bait. She's she'll roundly criticize Trump, yet she gets called a Trump supporter and an idiot and evil and all these things. And sometimes it's just fun to go in there and knock some heads around. But I am trying to cut back. So like I said, I don't really do that on my own page. I mostly have pages that promote the show or other things that I'm working on. I also have a Facebook page that is just Mises quotes. And so that posts a couple of Ludwig von Mises quotes. There's a few thousand that were compiled by Mark Thornton of the Mises Institute. He put it into a book a couple of years ago, and I loaded those up into a Facebook page, and so it posts just constantly. So there's lots of good content that's getting put out there. And I'll shift topics a little bit regarding getting burned out on shows and whatnot. I think it really helps for me because I like movies anyway, and I'm having conversations with my co-host anyway. I mean, literally all we're doing is talking more about a movie, but having the same conversations we were having anyway, just between the two of us when the only people recording it were the NSA. Well, now we're recording it too and posting it out there for the world. And it's starting to get a little bit of traction, which is kind of exciting because we've been plugging away for a long time and kind of getting like in that space where you're like, are we making a difference? Is this being an effective thing? But we both were like, well, we're going to do this anyway. We're going to talk to each other anyway. So why not just record it, make it a show? And now we're starting to see some of the momentum build, and that's really nice. And Patrick, back to you. I know that early on in your show, you were getting a lot of interaction with people and getting Patreon support as a result, and finding a bunch of people who were like-minded, fellow travelers, and all of that. And then lately, it seems like you've been getting people who are shit posters, or who are like trying to critique you on like some gotcha things, like you were saying, like, did you listen to the episode? Did you hear what I said? That kind of stuff. And when I get something critical, and if it's not legit, I don't even respond to it. Fuck them. It you go do a show, right? Mr. Commenter who's like upset with something I said, you go do a show and you go and promote your own stuff. I'm not going to let you drag me down. So that's my commentary on that.
Yeah, and I've been dealing with it better. I think like 2 weeks ago, I got really exasperated, and it wasn't it wasn't just from the show. It was also just from everything, being overwhelmed with everything in life too. But I've been dealing with it a lot better. But still, it does kind of suck you in a little bit. Yeah, so I think there is a happy medium between not giving any fucks and giving like fucks to the people who deserve them, because I do have listeners that I do value their opinion, but at the end of the day, I'm right.
Yeah, so you need the market optimum of fucks.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah. Well, what do you think, guys? Should we wrap it up here? I gotta turn my AC back on because it's starting to get really roasty in here.
Yeah, it's probably a good time.
Well, so I'll start with the wrap up plugs. Patrick MacFarlane of libertyweekly.net. As we discussed, I'm currently on hiatus. I had put an episode out yesterday or the day before because I had a pressing. There's a kind of a dramatic situation going on in my aunt and uncle's cabin regarding a noise nuisance, a private nuisance, and I thought it would be a good quick content thing just to kind of discuss how it would be handled legally in an anarchist society, an ANCAP society. So my niche is ANCAP, or anarchist legal theory. I just graduated from law school with my Juris Doctor. I'm going to be a practicing attorney here pretty soon. So I'm trying to fill that niche. When I come back, I'm going to have a different kind of format. I'm thinking shorter episodes like Kyle does, between 20 and 30 minutes, just straight kind of to the point, punchy. And I just joined the Libertarian Institute. Scott Horton was gracious enough to let me post my content on the libertarianinstitute.org. And that's a huge honor, super great, and I'm very grateful for it. So check out my show at libertyweekly.net. And if you like what I do, head on over to patreon.com/Liberty Weekly and consider supporting me. There is voluntary exchange there for some bonus content. So I'll hand it off to Mike. You ready?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So just to wrap up, I run the Battle for Liberty podcast. You can find everything that you need to find at battleforliberty.com. And just a quick side note, I've recently completely revamped the website top to bottom, gave it a new look, new logos, new navigation. I'm really, really happy with the website. So if you haven't been in quite a while, go to battleforliberty.com. I did take a hiatus for quite a long time while my family was getting used to having 3 children in the house, but I'm starting to publish more content now. My 2 most recent episodes, I think, are doozies. I talked with Nathan Dempsey, who runs Liberty Minecraft, which is just a brilliant way to teach liberty and to kind of have a testing ground for voluntarism. And then my most recent was on abortion and what I think the libertarian position on abortion should be. So you want to talk about contentious issue, that is one to listen to. So battleforliberty.com, go ahead and check it out there.
All right, awesome, Mike. Well, speaking of revamping of websites, I think that we're due for such at the libertarianunion.com, which we are all a part of, and there's about a dozen of us now. So libertarianunion.com will be getting a facelift in the next couple of weeks if I can find the time to do it. This will probably also affect readrothbard.com and potentially the Last Nighters, so lastnighters.com as well. I work on way too many things, often simultaneously, and find that I'm a man with many hats, but a master of none. So take it for what it is. A lot of the stuff might be middling, but I do intend to improve upon it. The main sites are actualanarchy.com and lastnighters.com. Our latest show is episode 82, Jurassic Park, so that's actualanarchy.com/82, or you can find the Last Nighters version at lastnighters.com/25. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I really enjoy working with you guys, and I think that we just need to keep plugging away, keep our head down, and keep putting out content because, like Kyle was saying earlier, we've got a show, we've got listeners, we are making an impact, and I think that every little bit certainly helps. And whether we're not seeing like necessarily monetary profits or benefits as a result, we are getting profits in other ways, psychic profit. There's a reason we're keeping doing this. We found each other by doing this, and I think that that's been a really positive step. And I'm just really thankful for that and for any listeners that we have. So I appreciate that, and say goodnight to you guys as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, here I'm going to put the LU bumper. So we'll close with that.
After a hard day burying my gold in an undisclosed tract of land somewhere in the rolling northeastern hills, nothing helps set my mind at ease about the impending societal collapse, quite like the fine podcast at the Libertarian Union. News and entertainment through an anarcho-capitalist lens lets me know I won't be alone. On that day when the normie hordes crest the hills into my little valley, and I'm forced to test the bounds of the non-aggression principle. So do yourself a favor and check out the Libertarian Union. Oh, and don't tell them who sent you.
All right, thanks for joining us, everyone. Peace.
Good night.